I'm Darren Virassammy.
I'm Brandon Miller.
And this is the Strengths Whisperer,
the show empowering leaders to create, build, and sustain great places to work.
To kick off the show, we'd like to give you a little bit of insight into why we're doing the show by letting you get to know us a little better. On this episode, we'll interview each other. So with that, Brandon, why don't you start by telling the audience a little bit more about who you are and your background?
Thanks, Darren. I began a journey into strengths in or around 2003. One day, sitting in my office, doing what it is that I was supposed to do as a manager inside of a organization. And one of the executive leaders walks in and he puts a book on my desk and he says, "Hey, I think that we should do this," which was always code for me for "you should do this." And as I picked up the book, the title was Now Discover Your Strengths. And I was caught. I thought, this is interesting. This could be a book that might really resonate with me. And so as I opened it up and I started to read about this idea of focusing on people's strengths, instead of thinking about what was wrong with them, put more and more emphasis on where you could help them be the best version of themselves. I'll admit that I didn't get too far into the book before I tore all the way to the back and I saw there was this tab I could tear out and go take this online assessment called StrengthsFinder. And I jumped online and I took it, and I have to tell you, I literally thought someone had followed me around or listened to the thoughts inside of my brain. I was captured by this information, these words I had never used before: maximizer, activator, arranger. These were words that were new to me, and yet as I read them, they resonated so deeply. From there, I had the opportunity to get some training on how this approach could integrate into a workplace. I was able to meet in a course and then encourage our entire staff to take the assessment. And when we did, and when we got to talk to people about their strengths, it changed everything about our workplace. We were listening to people who for the first time felt as I had felt, that they had found a new way to describe themselves. They had found a way that opened up possibilities, that gave them freedom to think differently about their role. Even some changed their role because realizing that there were parts of who they were that now they could see applying it in a direction that could really make a difference. That was the launch of something that has grown into my life, my career, the way I lead my family, the way I think about coaching sports. All of it has now become a big part of this journey into being a strengths-based leader, and led all the way up to this fun company we call 34 Strong. There's 34 strengths in the StrengthsFinder, and now we're here getting to do the same for others, to share with them the power of a strengths-based approach. So, Darren, okay, enough about me. It's your turn.
It's so interesting hearing the baton story of your journey from 2003. And Brandon and I actually met nearly a decade after he was introduced to the CliftonStrengths assessment. And my story was pretty simple. In 2012, I actually took the StrengthsFinder assessment for the first time. I was a new dad. My daughter was only about 4 months old at that time. And interestingly enough, I was living in a place where I had 2 jobs at the time. I was working as a senior project manager at a commercial construction company. And at the same time, I was teaching some classes on the side at a local college in the Sacramento region where we were living. And these 2 organizations couldn't be more different. The construction company, I had actually gotten to a place where I was really good at a job that I did not love. I was actually becoming disengaged in my work. And at the same time, the 1 or 2 classes that I would pick up a week to teach, I saw a culture where people loved coming to work, where they felt connected. They felt like they were making a difference. And I was not feeling that at the time at the construction company. December of 2012, my family and I took a trip to the Big Island of Hawaii. It was the first time my wife, my daughter, and I had traveled together as just the 3 of us as a family. And on that trip, my little girl was sitting on my lap one morning, right, Brandon? I took a sip of coffee And she laughed out loud for the first time. And for me, that was one of the most amazing and terrifying experiences of my life. Now, it was amazing because I had recently taken the StrengthsFinder. I'd started thinking in terms of strengths, but didn't really know much about it. And I thought, wow, this beautiful little being is going to laugh. She's going to talk. She's going to walk. She's going to do all of these things. And what is in store for her when she learns how to tap into her potential? And at the same time, I had to face the stark reality that I was not tapping into my potential, and I was not living a life that would model that for my little girl. I was commuting a really long distance, 100 miles one way to get to my job in construction, and would leave in the morning before she was awake, and I'd get home many evenings as she was going to bed. I knew something had to change. As fate would have it, I came back from that trip, and sure enough, the college said, hey, would you like to take on teaching some more classes? We have a full-time position that's opened up. So long and the short of it, I said yes to that, took a massive pay cut, but something inside of me changed in that trip and seeing my little girl laugh out loud for the first time. And it was the notion that I personally didn't want to just be part of that problem. I wanted to figure out how I could be part of the solution and create more workplace cultures like the one that I'd experienced while I was teaching at the college. Friends and family around me took note of that, and a dear friend of both Brandon and myself just said, you two should really sit down and have a cup of coffee together. And we did, and we both had a vision of what the workplace could be like and how in transforming the workplace, in getting people to understand what it was to play to their strengths, what that could lead to for generations to come, where people could be better members of their community, better to their family. They would go home not being as exhausted. So that's a little bit of my journey and our journey together. And that's how this journey of 34 Strong begun. With that, Brandon, I want to ask you, we've talked a little bit about StrengthsFinder, CliftonStrengths as it's known now. Can you speak a little bit with your expertise? I mean, you were one of the first Gallup certified strengths coaches in the world. What is it that's specifically so unique about this assessment?
The origin story of StrengthsFinder is one that goes back many decades. In fact, it's after World War II. And a member of that amazing generation, Dr. Donald O. Clifton, was in his graduate studies, and he was in the field of psychology, and he had this lingering, nagging question. As he was studying his field, he noticed that almost all of the resources available to him were focused on human disease and neurosis. And his question, his lingering question nagging at him was, where are all the resources to talk about what's right with people? Where is the information to tell us about human greatness and human genius and human capacity for excellence? And this launched him and eventually a team of amazing scientists and researchers and leaders to come alongside to really understand what is it that causes a person to perform at their very best, to perform with excellence or with standout ability. And so over the course of decades, they began this worldwide search of talent. And talent is simply a recurring pattern of how we think, how we feel, how we behave. And it can be with knowledge, with skill, with practice. It can be productively applied for outstanding results. And so literally, Darren, they studied the best lawyers, the best doctors, the best teachers, the best librarians, and they worked backwards to uncover what were the patterns used to help these people be amazing. You could say it was the greatest talent search ever done in history. And at the conclusion of that body of research, they were able to take that and then begin to work it down to create what is called a psychometric assessment. And so StrengthsFinder, as it was called and aptly named, was intended for a person to find their strengths through an assessment. What makes this assessment unique, and I think it's what draws people in, is that it speaks to the very heart of your greatest talents. It uncovers for you specific terms. And so there are 34 different terms. They're called themes of talent, or as today we refer to them as CliftonStrengths for the namesake of the founder, if you will. And these terms give you incredible insight into who you are, how you probably function, the ways that you engage with people in your life, and very likely the sorts of things that you can do that very few people can do with sustained excellence, not just once or twice, but over and over and over again, sustaining excellence.
Thanks for that description. That's really powerful in terms of what it can do and the fact that there was so much research and validation that's been done on it and continues to be done on it, because with each new person that's taking it, continues to grow that database. Now, one of the things that we live in today is we hear all of these new terms and fads of things that are going on right now, and there'll be more to come that we haven't yet named. The interesting thing is there's a correlation between strengths and these terms in terms of an ability to resolve some of these issues. These terms like quiet quitting, the great resignation, they actually have in common something that has been in existence for many, many years, and it's called employee engagement, or rather employee disengagement. People can be checked out of their jobs. They're there for 8 hours a day, and they are doing the bare minimum, if that, to get by. And a lot of that actually ties into, are they feeling valued for being valuable? Are they being developed through their strengths? Or as Brandon talked about, when Clifton started this work decades and decades ago, are they being developed through the areas of their weakness focus only? And there's a ripple effect, not only to how we feel, but how organizations develop, how their culture develops. And over time, with the development of our show, you'll get to hear from different leaders that have worked and implemented this in their organizations and how it's transformed not only people individually, but their organizations at large to move the needle on this concept and this framework of employee engagement, which is something that we can measure. And there's 3 tiers of that. There's employee engagement, employee disengagement, and then there's active disengagement. And we've been battling this for decades. We'll talk more about that in a future episode, but that is the foundation of what strengths can do for us in our organizations. Brandon, I want to shift gears a little bit. You laid the framework for what the StrengthsFinder is, the validations around it. Let's talk a little bit about you. Tell me a little bit about your top 5 of those 34 strengths.
I've actually taken the assessment 4 times. And one of the greatest questions people will have is, if I take the assessment again, will my results change? And we'd like to tell you that the answer to that is, of course. Think of this psychometric assessment as a moment in time. So it's you at that moment, almost like an x-ray of you. And just like you're going to grow and change in your body physically, you will grow and change with your talents. Now, what makes StrengthsFinder so powerful is that some of your results, we can call those your core strengths, they will most often group around the top. They can stay in what we call the top 10 most dominant strengths, and they will cluster. And so the 5 for me that have endured through the last 20 years of working with this assessment are: first, maximizer; second, achiever; third, activator; fourth, strategic; and fifth, arranger. Of those 5, the one that I'm probably most known for and know myself as is activator. All 4 times that I've taken the assessment, activator has either shown up 1, 2, or 3, and number 1 twice. The most recent was 3. I like to leave it right there in that middle of that top 5 because activators, we are known for getting things started. When a decision is made, we cannot not take action. Something needs to be done, and though we may learn how to do that in pace or learn to do that in time, we know that at our core, nothing is real until action has been taken. And so we're a catalyst, we're a driver, we are those that have a high risk tolerance. So we're willing to step out, try new things, go down different pathways, because to us, failure is just another way we've learned not to do something. Failure is never final for us. It's always a way to see a path ahead. And Darren, as far back as I can remember, I've been a young person who had a streak of being impetuous or a streak of speaking before really thinking through what I was going to say, not always to my benefit. And when I read about Activator, it connected so many dots. This is why Brandon had a note home from probably every teacher I've ever had from kindergarten to 8th grade about talking too much or talking back. And I think as I understood it, I realized, wow, that part of me that just had a quip or a quick comment, that's actually a realm of strength. And if I could learn how to develop and harness this energy and grow it, this could really grow into an asset, which thankfully over time it has. So Darren, I'd love to ask you the same question. What are your top 5 and which one resonates with you the most?
When our listeners listen and we reflect on Brandon's strengths, you're going to hear that Brandon and I share 4 of the same top 5. So I have maximizer, achiever, arranger, self-assurance, and activator. So the only one that we don't share in our top 5 is self-assurance. And this is important to note. I mentioned the first time that I took the assessment was in 2012. I was an employee at the time. I was not an entrepreneur. I had just become a dad. Now, I retook the assessment before the pandemic because I had believed that these strengths from 2012, when I was heavy in construction project manager mindset, were different. Something had changed after nearly a decade of being an entrepreneur, after growing as a father, having 2 kids at that point, and growing in that whole cycle of my life. Something just wasn't feeling right. A lot of my previous strengths were very, very what we like to call execution based. I was a person that was known, just give it to Darren and he is just get it done kind of guy. I still have very much elements of that within me, but something in me had shifted to where that wasn't feeling like that was my core driver. And these talents, they develop as a matter of nature and nurture. And the changes that I had to make personally in navigating what it's like moving from being an employee, working on construction project deadlines, to working alongside of Brandon and our team to build 34 Strong as an entrepreneur and grow as a dad. They were different talents that were right there. So I did have some significant shifts in that 8-year differential from when I took it. The strength that I want to talk about that both Brandon and I share is maximizer. You can't see my video right now, but hanging over my right shoulder is a bass guitar. I've been playing bass for nearly well over half my life, 26 years, and it has always been something that I look to get better at, and there's no end in the pursuit of excellence. You can keep refining, you can keep cultivating, keep sharpening the saw, and it's the process of the continual polishing that is what I have worked on. And that has been with me for decades on the bass. That has truly been my rawest form. And it showed up in our organization and in our business building, and for me personally and my family, of constantly shifting to what is right and how do we build upon these areas of strength. That applies in our organization, in the structures that we have in place. It applies to the people development side. And interestingly enough, Brandon, that maximizer, has been strong in him. And over the nearly decade that we've worked together, that wasn't in my top 10 in my initial results. But working in that environment where it was in my top 15, it was pulled forward and it moved up. And the work that we do, it totally resonated when I saw that shift nearly 8 years later in taking it. And it's very, very much aligned with me personally on a value side and how I look at the world within our company in terms of what we're doing, the impact that we're looking at making when we're helping to work with other teams, and just the focus that I have overall in my life. So there's so much more to unpack. There's these 34 strengths. We'll be hearing different iterations of them as we move through the show, as we talk to different guests, as we do some live coaching sessions with them. You'll get to hear their ahas in going through that. And we all have those same 34 strengths, but they exist in a different ranked order. for all of us. All of us have them in a different order. And Brandon, what is it? Is it 1 in 6 billion is the likelihood of somebody having their top 10 in the same order as you?
It's pretty amazing how unique the results are. I mean, the top 5 in the same order are 1 in 33 million, and the top 10, 1 in 6 billion. And Darren, I just want to say how much I appreciate the way that you describe how strengths can change, because that is probably one of the most common questions we get is, will I change? And as I mentioned, it's a certainty. And what you can look for in these results are there will be core and growth strengths. And that was the nod to the nurture and the nature, meaning there are certain strengths that are just genetically coded. They're core to your being. You couldn't unbe them if you tried. And then there's going to be strengths that are going to be influenced by the way you were brought up by your caregivers, or what your environment was like, or where there was necessity that involved even literal survival or just perceived reality within the context of your life. And that can happen through the arc of life. And Darren shared some of the big life changers, having a family, going into an entirely new role. Because I think, Darren, your story is interesting, but I don't know that others, when they hear it, won't see it as entirely unique in this facet, that people can find themselves in a career and then one day realize, I don't think I'm in the right place. I can do this. I can do it well. I could do it amazing, but this is draining me. This isn't adding energy. And at the core of a strengths approach is that you will do things that make you feel strong. You will do things that cause you to stand out. So you're going to sustain excellence while being energized by it. And both of those will continue to build endurance and a real enjoyment or well-being. And so Darren's story is something that, as we get to uncover it with leaders, talk about their strengths, some of them, first time they've ever taken the assessment. Others, it's going to be they've been working at it inside their organization. But I really wanted to comment there about that uniqueness, that those top 10, as Darren said, the way we test an assessment is test, retest reliability. This one, about 7 or 8 of the 10 stay. They're pretty sticky, but that's a range. It could be 5 of 10. It could be 9 of 10 if you were to retake it. And so some of the leaders you're going to hear are going to have test, retest, the way Darren described his. They're going to have different versions of it, and we're going to find those connectors and the ones they resonate and how they're leveraging them.
That's right. And that piece that you alluded to about finding ourselves in a role where we're actually good at our work, but are completely not engaged. We're not feeling that energy coming from it. That a good pulse is, do you feel energized by your work or do you feel exhausted by it? In both situations, you might be working really hard. And 2 of my strengths in my top 5, achiever and self-assurance, one of the good things about them is they're very resilient. One of the bad things about them is because they're so resilient, they'll just keep pushing through, even though you're actually completely miserable and you're just, I'm going to do it anyhow for no good reason. And that can be some of the edge that we have to deal with our strengths. And we'll unpack more of that as we're going forward. I want to transition here, Brandon, to a little bit more along the lines of the employee story of what it's like being inside of an organization. So we know that no great place to work is built alone. No strengths-based organization is built alone. While the impact of creating one resonates throughout organizations, its impact is also felt in the homes and communities. And this brings forth the core of what Brandon and I locked arms on in February of 2012, the first time we sat down together, which was, what will it be like when a parent is going home to a child? Somebody's going home to their community, to their friends, to their family, to their loved ones, and they're able to still give the best version of themselves there. That those people are not getting the leftovers because work has taken everything from them. I personally lived through and had been a highly disengaged employee there. And I also had one iteration where a manager was so demanding. At 23 years of age, I was physically waking up at 2:00 in the morning and throwing up multiple days per week. The job physically made me sick. And how I was showing up to my friends and family. And as we've talked through our career and our work within 34 Strong, we've heard many of those stories and seen the transformations that people have made, sometimes within their existing job, or sometimes it's transitioning out of that. What are those children going to think when they see a parent who's come home from work and has felt valued for being valuable? They're feeling like they've had an impact in the world, but they still have something left to give. What's that child's perception of work going to be like? So part of the work that we're doing here, and when you're thinking about this and becoming your very own strengths whisperer in your own life and into your organizations, it's not all about what happens in the right now. It's the transformation that actually takes place over time. And with that, Brandon, I want to ask you, what's a story that you can share from a client of transformation that you've seen take place organizationally as they went from knowing that they wanted to become a great place to work, knowing that they wanted to shift their organizational culture and be intentional and have a hand in the design of that culture, as opposed to just doing it by accident and pretending like culture doesn't matter?
Absolutely. We have a leader that one day will come on the show and probably share this story herself. But there was a team that we worked with who we had spent time with a leader and spent time trying to support this team to improve some of their key metrics. And so one of the ways that we think about supporting a team is we try to get a baseline of where their level of engagement is at. Darren mentioned earlier that we think about engagement through the paradigm of three positions. Some people will show up to work engaged, disengaged, or actively disengaged. And there is assessment that we partner with Gallup on called the Q12, letter Q, number 12, Q12. And this assessment gives us a nice starting point. Here you are now, you are here. And so with this particular team, after working with a leader, they had a transition to a new leader. And this transition occurred right after the survey was completed. And so in our first meeting with this leader, we went in and we said, we have to give you the results today. And the best news I have for you is that you have nowhere to go but up, because the result that I was about to share ranked them out of a scale of 1 to 100 in the first percentile. And that's not number one first. That is the lowest first. And so as being in the 1 percentile, we began a journey with this leader and the team. And we began to engage them through this process of learning their strengths, learning how to first communicate with these strengths, how to understand self and others through this paradigm of there are some amazing qualities, talents, traits you bring. Let's understand what those are. And then let's also understand how they inform the way that you prefer to be communicated with, how you prefer to learn, what's the ideal way for you to engage with us as a team. Secondly, we began to work on collaboration. How do we share ideas? How do we form strategy? How do we solve problems? How can we get in a room and know who brings which piece of the puzzle, because none of us shows up with the whole puzzle. So a strengths approach recognizes that we all have a part, but none of us have all the pieces. And that's a very important paradigm that this approach liberates people into. I don't have to have it all. I have others. And it's a wonderful way to think about collaboration in a cooperative spirit. And then third, what they went for, Darren, was a collegial environment. A place where we could laugh at ourselves, laugh with each other, just enjoy the reality that we were all people growing, developing in our careers, developing in our lives. This creates a space to know and be known, to build high trust, to know that we can be cared for, to create a stability around we each know the level of pressure that we all face, and that individually how we sustain that together. And then build toward a future. What's our goals and how do we celebrate those wins? And so in this leader's effort to use a strengths approach to facilitate communication, collaboration in a collegial environment, in 2 years, we had that meeting again. I came in with the results and I said, I have great news for you. When we first met, we said you had nowhere to go but up. And up you have gone. In the course of the time and the work you've put in, you are now a 97 percentile team, from 1 to 97. And that may sound impressive, and believe me, it is. What also followed was the notoriety, the impact, the way that this team performed on almost every other key performance indicator that was to be measured against them. This team outperformed index. They were a sight to behold within their organization because this was a department that others looked at and wanted to know, what are you doing there? And what we love to share, Darren, is that, and we've seen this occur, that one team, that one group has become a catalyst for an entire agency to really take a look and start to shape an entire agency through this perspective of strengths.
So powerful. In 2 years, a journey from leading the way as one of the most disengaged teams around that's been measured to being a top scoring team. And that comes into the notion, Brandon, of what we were talking about, creating that culture by intention and design. It's powerful when we can see these small pieces here within an organization becoming the starting point and being that catalyst for change. One of the things that you talked about in your first point of understanding people's strengths, their team members' strengths, you talked about what's unique about traits. Can you share maybe like what an example of differing traits are? Like maybe like how do people think differently? Are there different ways that people think and process how they think? Can you share any insights that could be beneficial for our listeners today?
So when we think about leaders and our understanding of the different ways that people will learn, the different ways that people will approach their work, the different ways that people will engage with others, what we love about StrengthsFinder is that because of the breadth of the inventory, so 34 different terms, and this is an intact language, it gives insights to different ways that we're going to approach our thoughtful concept around problem solving. So for example, Darren, one of the domains of the 34 strengths fit into 4 unique domains. And one of the domains is the strategic thinking domain. And inside of that domain, there are 8 strengths. And these strengths give insight into how a person likely will process information. So for example, analytical is one of those strengths. And analyticals, they use a scientific approach. They're going to test a theory. They're going to look for the results. They're very logic-based as compared to a strength of intellection. These are very thoughtful people. They do some of their best work in solitude, and they like to process and to give a lot of time and depth and really introspection before they make a decision. And then we could compare that to another strength called strategic. The strategic in CliftonStrengths, as we'll learn on our show together, is not dictionary strategy. This is strategic that could be more described as intuition. These are people who think through what some call their gut. They're going to think through a different way that they process information. It's very quick. So analyticals, more scientific, intellects, more thoughtful, introspective. When you think of strategic, they're very instinctual. They move on instinct and they can move in that way. And so we're going to see paradigms of thoughtfulness around that domain that give us insight into how people think. And what's fascinating is it will impact how they learn. And so some are going to learn because they just see and read, visualize, and that's their highest output. Others, they're going to see and do. So see it, get on it, put my hands on it. I don't really know it till I do it. That's going to describe other strengths in what we call the executing domain, more of the achievers and the arrangers that you and I share some of these strengths, getting in and doing the work. And then others of us, we got to see it and then talk about it. We got a verbal process. We don't know what we think till we see what we've said. And sometimes the talking it out is actually where the idea comes together as our words create the picture and show us the imagery. And that's how we resonate back. It's coming through our ears. And so these different styles of thinking and different styles of learning, CliftonStrengths gives insight. It gives introspection into, I'm working with you. We're team members. We're going to see the same picture through different filters, and we can both gain insight into how we uniquely can approach it and learn from each other.
Thanks for sharing that, Brandon. And I want to ask our audience, if you had to evaluate your thinking style, even if you don't know your CliftonStrengths results, do you find that you're more introspective or are you more of a verbal processor? Where do you lie? Just think about that. Think about others that you know that you work with, and just in understanding that, that's a little nugget that can be really powerful. If you are, for instance, a verbal processor, like both Brandon and I tend to be, it might be helpful to announce to those around you that you're working with that, hey, I'm just talking out some ideas out loud. We don't need to move to action on these, because some strengths, to Brandon's point of that guiding how they actually learn, they might hear something that is said and take that immediately as we are going to task with this. And you might just be putting your ideas out there to actually see and feel what you think by talking it through and putting it out there. It can be helpful to just make that announcement or to ask if somebody needs a little bit more time to reflect and think about it, because that'll actually set that person up to come to the table for the discussion that you need to have very, very effectively. Brandon, it's hard to believe that we are already wrapping up our pilot episode. It has been quite a ride. I am very excited about what we have in store together and with many of our other guests that'll be joining us. So on that note, I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us today and listening to us share our stories. For our listeners out there, I want to leave you with something practical and tactical that you can do. Are you ready? Take note, and I want you to email Brandon, Brandon, at 34strong.com and take the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment. We believe in this so much, we will provide you a complimentary top 5 assessment. So you could start learning about your own strengths and diving into that and seeing how powerful this actually is just for yourself. The way that we move to the organizational transformation is very much started by self-awareness. So again, email Brandon at 34strong.com and put in the subject line, top 5 strengths. We will provide you an assessment, no cost to you, just so you could take that and get started on your journey.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Strengths Whisperer. What did you take away from our conversation? We'd love to know.
In the meantime, hit that follow button so you don't miss out on more conversations just like this one.
And don't worry, it won't just be me and Darren the next time. We've got some fabulous guests lined up and can't wait to hear their stories.
See you next time, everybody.